recording button, don't I?
I'm very relaxed, as you can tell. I've been stretching. G'day, mate. Welcome back to the ISS podcast. Part 2. We couldn't fit the whole story in 90 minutes. Let's see if we can get it in now. Now that you're coming on, we've got your history post-defence to go through, but some of the big stuff that I want to head on too, a man of your knowledge, we can touch on the Ukraine stuff if you've got your head into that a little bit.
Yeah.
How
Yeah,
are you,
good.
mate?
Yeah, it's been a busy, Chrissy and New Year, I guess, for everyone. And the weather's got its own challenges. Last week it was boiling hot, and this week it's been thunderstorms and flooding in Sydney, so never a dull moment.
No, it's going to be interesting to see. Everything's coming up to the election now, so everyone's going to be making up. We're not going to get a whole lot of truth out of anything. There'll be all the spin.
I think that's going to... Yeah, sorry, go on.
Mate.
No, I was just going to say the election is a massive one, and I think it's going to take agitators. I know I'm agitating the fuck out of Karen Andrews about the Australian families still stuck in Syrian camps. The only reason the world found out initially about the ISIS camp attacks was a teenager Australian kid in the camp calling for help. Like, what's that about? Anyway, bring it on.
Bring it on. So let's go over part 1. We spoke about you. For everyone else that hasn't gone back, go back and have a listen to part 1 of the Terrorist Hunter. Shane, you spent a large part of your career as an intelligence analyst, and then you moved on to doing domestic counter-terrorism and counter-violent extremism.
Yeah. So no CVE work in the military, but in the job I had in SO Command, when I was back in Australia, I was part of the tactical assault groups East and West, and the special recovery operations. So the actual exercise tempo in that space is really, really high because of the tags have got to be constantly certified in certain aspects of their mission set. And so, for example, when CHOGM, so the Commonwealth Heads of Government, was on in Australia, Op Amulate in 2011, I spent 2 months on the West Coast, and that's, you do a crawl, walk, run approach just because you're working with, the best unit in the Australian military. What makes them the best unit is they start from crawl, right? We haven't done this mission set for a little while. Let's go to the basics. Let's go to, our shooting, our weapons, our driving, and then that culminates with a couple of full mission profiles, a week out, which was, awesome. The Queen was in the country at the same space, or same time, so we're also doing some oversight with the Queen, and then President Obama came out, and he was in Canberra. Then he went up to Darwin for a ceremony for a bombing of Darwin, and so we had to fly across to Canberra, and then I'll never forget this. We had to fly to Darwin behind his in front of us. Land on Darwin airfield, basically sit there for him to do the 4-hour ceremony, come back, and then fly to Hawaii. Then we flew back to Perth. So, I know my ex-wife, she used to hate it more when I was on domestic counter-terrorism than in Afghanistan because, you get messages at 2 a.m. coming to work and, you go in for a day and you're on an exercise or, I did some real-time operations that you just can't plan for. So it was awesome.
What actually is CHOGM and the G20 for other people like, and how much goes into those events and the security behind them? And is there a threat to those particular meetings?
Yeah, so obviously CHOGM is the Commonwealth Heads of Government. So all the leaders in the current or previous Commonwealth countries, and the Queen is the head of the Commonwealth still, so she oversees that. So she's going to be in location, or Prince Charles, but predominantly used to be the Queen. So you've got to look at what countries are attending and what their threats are. So that can be more of a threat issue for the hosting country, because you've got to really assess and analyse all of that. And the enemy has got a lot longer lead time than you have, especially if you're in a busy organisation. So they could plant or have local cells or dissidents on the ground, 2 years in advance, essentially, or in university. So there's a lot of leading prep from a threat risk side and the G20 is the same. So that's the head leaders of the 20 leading global countries, and obviously it's headed by POTUS, so the President of the United States, Xi Jinping from China, Russia. They all turn up, maybe only for a couple of days, but they get there. It's like the big cousin to the G7 and 8. And that was in Brisbane. Yep.
So noting that there are heads from such a wide variety of countries, who would actually be one of the people that would look to attack that particular
Well, you've
site? What country?
So you've got America as presidents coming out. So you've got Al Qaeda, Islamic State, obviously your notable ones. Then you've got political terrorists, and I'll use that term referencing the US because it's obviously a big part there. But you might have Republican supporters come out. So it spans everything from passive protest, key demonstrators, political demonstrators, right through to your terrorism threats. So, anyone really, from someone like in Sydney the other day, they blocked off a major road. Now, if that's a motorcade road or something, that's a threat you've got to look at, right through to your sophisticated attacks. But
would there be countries where, like, if it's Australia, you're like, hey, come on, this is fairly safe, or they do the G20 and, are they host nations that rotate through, or do they put them in like real weird countries?
Both. So CHOGM goes to Africa, it goes to any country that's a member of the Commonwealth heads can host one of those events. So the UK MI6 really has the lead for that. Not at a tactical sense, but definitely operational. When they're looking, they start, most people don't like to admit it, but within the global intelligence community, every country's intelligence architecture and capabilities is assessed. So if they come to Australia in the Five Eyes, work with everyone, they know that they don't have to do as much, I'll say, oversight as if they're going to an African country, for example. Or when they're going into Canada. But let's look at Canada recent times, the trucker dispute and emergency powers. If there was a CHOGM scheduled to be headed in Canada, that would elevate. And then with the G20, or any time you've got the President of the United States going anywhere, Secret Service are in charge. Even when you get him or one of the senior US political figures into Australia, the Secret Service advance are out months earlier, checking routes, liaising with local law enforcement. That road's going to be blocked. We want access to this. And with the US, if you don't give them what they want, trip's not happening.
So if we were talking like that and the American Secret Service was liaising with the federal police, they are literally just like, this is what we're doing, or it's not happening.
So, and the Secret Service, because of our close ties, has a permanent presence in the US Embassy in Australia. So, again, that constant dialogue and updating liaisons going on. But 100%, if you don't give the Secret Service everything that they request, they just not happening. They have complete... And that goes back to my first experience with them leading up to the Sydney Olympics. They were the only country, except Israel, that were allowed to carry weapons. Their security guys carry weapons with inside Australia. The Brits weren't, but they're like, look, if you want a US presence, then and Israel ever since Munich are exactly the same.
They're just like, no, this is what we're doing.
Pretty much. So
I can't
Yeah,
believe
so
that.
from my role as the, especially the CB, so chemical, biological, radiological, explosive threat analyst, you know, I'm liaising with them from that side of the house. Is there an ID threat? And then looking at force protection measures, barriers on sidewalks, and you know, in the G20 in the early days, there was a little bit of lack of communication on the ops part, and they put the big barriers on the road and not on the footpath, which made some of the secondary roads too tight for some of the lead vehicles, to fire trucks and that to get down. So, you know, and this is why you rehearse and you get to the areas, you know, weeks in advance, and you do your full mission profiles, because the other thing, the host nation's emergency response have to be certified. And so, for example, you pick, say they're having it in Sydney, you pick 6 hotels that the delegates can stay in, and only those 6. And then the security apparatus has to be certified in conducting operations within those hotels. So, you know, that's why, for example, as part of the tactical assault group handover, so that at an operational level gets handed over every 12 months. You've got to certify Martin Place, Opera House every year at about October, November. You know, you set your watch by 2 Commando doing exercises around Sydney, and Black Hawks flying around the harbour, you know, ship underway, subterranean assault. And then they'll go to other states and key areas there and get certified. And you know, if you do a FMP, so a certification operation, and it doesn't go to plan, got to do it again. So it's very, very high tempo, and from both sides of the house, you're always exercising, and you always got some sort of operation, whether it involves 4-man liaison element to, you know, a commando company group.
So with the Martin Place that just happened, noting that, well, not just happened, a couple of years
Lint.
ago now, they had, or the Lint Cafe, wasn't it?
Yeah,
was that
correct.
in Martin Place. And the Schmozzle, where there was a jurisdictional problem, it was because 2 Commando didn't have authority to operate within the city?
No.
What was the actual process?
So what it was, the New South Wales Police, now everything I'm going to say is in the Martin Place coronial inquest. They wouldn't call it a terrorist incident. So because they wouldn't do that, it didn't enact the National Counter-Terrorism Strategy, which the moment that happens, the ADF can become involved. Now, the ADF were already rehearsing and had liaison officers in place. I was involved in the Lint Cafe siege at a intelligence liaison capacity. But because they knew that the moment they call it a terrorist incident, even though the whole world, including the Prime Minister, was calling it a terrorist incident, because the New South Wales government wouldn't, the ADF were very limited to what they could do. And then the other issue, so the backside to the Lint Cafe is the Lint Cafe wasn't the only target. Man Monis prior had already said that he had planted bombs in a number of locations in Sydney. Now, that quickly drained the bomb squad's resources. So because they didn't make it a terrorism incident, they had to get other bomb squad guys from the Queensland police to come down to augment them. And then you have work-rest ratio. So, you know, after 12 hours, you've got to have a secondary force in any capacity, from the tactical assault group or the police special operations group to the bomb squad to the general duties coppers manning the outer perimeter or the outer cordon. And so you got to look at that. And that was where the schmozzle started. And I could go into the litany of other issues. But after that and after the coronial report, they reframed the national terrorist, I guess, call out. So the Governor General, who actually is in command of the Australian Defence Force, via the and then the Prime Minister, they now have a lot greater powers to step in over the states in a terrorism incident.
Yeah, I mean, this is all part of the thing, especially with COVID, that sort of pulled the blinkers off me. I assumed that we were a federation and the Prime Minister could actually boss the states around. No, that is actually not correct. And you know, the premiers can do whatever the fuck they want generally. And it was only now with these additional powers that we're giving them to the Prime Minister that he can actually step in and
yeah, I agree. I was really shocked by that. I think about 8 months in, when it was really, you know, you were coming up to, I think it was the WA and Queensland elections, and Anna and dictator Mark were really trying to outdo each other on how harsh they could treat their populations. I reached out to some friends of mine, like academics and legal scholars, and said, fuck, surely that the Prime Minister can go to the Supreme Court, or there is something in our Constitution that the Prime Minister can do this. And, you know, I guess it's one way you look at the US Constitution and their founding fathers, and hats off that they wrote such a robust document, whereas you're 100% right. And I think that shocked 100% of Australia. And because if you remember before that, the bushfires, when, you know, Scott Morrison copped grief for being in Bali, and there was that famous fire truck guy that pulled over and got out and he's yelling, "Where are you, Scott?" Well, I think we've discussed this before too. Scott Morrison couldn't do anything. It was up to the states. The states run the fire services, both the rural and the metropolitan ones, and the Commonwealth just gives out money, really. A lot of the logistics in that is at a state level. But I'm glad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. But I'm glad that, you know, and I tweeted this out about 8 weeks ago, why they hadn't already asked for ADF help from, you know, Med Corps and Transport Corps. You know, like when they're saying that all these nurses and ambulance officers were struggling just because of fatigue, the medical corps, all the army medics, they do those AMBO courses. They qualified to drive an ambulance under lights and sirens. Partner them up with one of New South Wales AMBO. The army guy or girl drives, and the AMBO's in the back with the patient. That doubles your workforce. But it's all there under the Defence Aid to Civil Communities Authorities. But I'm glad that in a lot of sense sanity prevailed, because you look at the areas that the government does have control of. How quick did we send assistance to Tonga? You know?
Yeah, within 24, wasn't it? I mean, people were spinning up.
And we know, you know, we've both been in those, in the ADF in those times. You just go to work anyway. You want to help. You join the Army or the Defence Force to help Australians. So it's not hard for the bosses to call, you know, or people back into work, because most of the time they're coming back already, you know. The bushfires the year before, when they got the Navy in, because water was the only way they could reach those people in the South Coast, most of those guys and girls were heading back to work already. You know, I'm here, boss, let's go. That's gets lost a lot of the time. But at its core, and I know in our last podcast we spoke a lot about why does someone join to go to war? Well, it's not necessarily war. It's we join to serve, you know, to serve Australians. And whether it's a bushfire or floods or COVID or a war, we want to help Australians.
Yeah, I think that COVID stuff got long in the tooth from that. I think the boys are stretched. I think they've actually been tasked to do nursing care. They're looking after, but it's interesting. So from all this, doing all this, so working as an intelligence analyst, working with in the special forces community, and working on these high profile stuff, this took a toll, I'm assuming, one day, and you said, look, you know what, or whatever it was, I'm getting out. Was your transition smooth getting out, or?
So I was supposed to have a shoulder surgery in October 2014, and you know, we were out of Afghanistan. There was nothing really on the horizon. And it was kind of, I was going to really reduce my commitment post-surgery. And then obviously the Islamic State flared up and, I might end up in Iraq or in the Middle East in August of that year. And then I got back at the back end of March 15, and not only was my right shoulder busted, but so was my left. And so I had both of my surgeries within a year, and they didn't go well. So rehab was an absolute nightmare. So I got discharged in September 16, but I was only medically downgraded. I received some pretty poor advice. I had a incompetent separation health examination, but had somewhere to go. So I transitioned out, and I was doing security vetting initially. And the main was, I'll never forget, and I was only having a talk about this yesterday. When I got back from Iraq, my middle son, Zach, I was in Afghanistan in 2012 when he was born, and had missed a lot of his early part of his life, and we had planned a massive birthday party for his second birthday, thinking I was going to be home, and that was in mid-September. So then obviously I've deployed to the Middle East, and I remember getting off that plane, and as you come out of customs at Sydney Airport, he's come running down and jumped in my arms, and I just started crying. And as I was still walking out, the boss looked at me and he just goes, "You're done, aren't you, mate?" And I just went, yeah, I'm done. And it was at that point that my whole world became about becoming a dad and being a good dad. So that focusing on that made transition, I'll say, easier at the time because that was my front side focus, but it took a toll backside because I didn't understand about mental health. Because my separational health exam was so poor, I thought I was in much better physical and mental shape than I was. But it was nothing, it was a high five. The unit initially gave me a heap of exercise to come back and do reserve time. I didn't even clean my locker out, It was like, yeah, we'll see you in a couple of weeks to work with the Yanks. The SF dudes coming out. I go, yeah, cool. None of that played out. Absolutely none of it. I got a nasty gram, come and get your shit out of your locker or we're going to throw it in a bin. And then I got all my physical injuries went downhill. I got capsulitis in both my shoulders, which resulted in a permanent 70% loss of movement. Can't put my arms above my head, can't put my arms behind my back, chronic pain, and then the mental health issues started. And the kick in the nuts for me was it came in 2020 when I worked out the retrospective medical discharge route, and the actual cell in the ADF that were looking after that, they were excellent. But and I'm happy to post it, they sent me a letter which was the acknowledgement of me being retrospective medically discharged. But like one of the points said on it, we as in the ADF knew that Corporal Healey was a psychological wreck from 2011. I'm like, well, why did you let me continually deploy and why didn't you help me back then? And, they said, we knew that his right shoulder was unfit for service. I'm like, you deployed me again there too. So Army wanted what Army got. Now, while I say, and I used to say that it was my fault, I was very job focused. In reflection, I never had the choice or the ability to make that decision because no one from Army actually came to me and said I was busted. So it's one thing to say I made the choice to continue, say even to go to Iraq in 14-15, but I wasn't given a choice because I didn't know that Army already viewed me as a psychological wreck or that my physical injuries were at a place that it was going to have a permanent effect. So, but I was lucky. I had a good support network within the veterans community. Shout out to Benny and the Northern Beaches Veterans Centre that helped with my DVA process until DVA became DVA. And, ComSuper are absolutely woeful. But, yeah.
And then, so you're going through a nightmare of one job to the next. What were you doing? What got you back into work? Or, I mean, was there a dwell?
So me and another guy I worked with, we obviously in the role that I had in military, one of our, I'll say 5% was protective security within a unit. So clearances and vetting and stuff. So we looked at vetting for clearances is all outsourced to some companies. So we go, fuck, how do you get that job? We already had the qualifications through defence to do that role. We made some inquiries and the money's pretty good, to be fair.
To vet security clearances?
So to vet someone to get an NV1, so a secret clearance, you get about $400 per pack. Yeah, to do
well, how much work's involved?
An NV1, so a young 19-year-old kid going to Kapuka to go on to become a SIG or, some role that they require an NV1, a kid who's still living at home and that, it's about 15 minutes, to be honest.
$400 for 15 minutes. Work.
Because at a secret level, you don't have to do an interview unless there's extenuating circumstances, so criminal record, divorce or something. But if, like I said, most of them young kids going to Kapuka or going into the Navy, especially the Navy because most of them are technical trades, it's not hard, at all. NV2, where you have to do an interview, the interview takes time. You've got to organise it. If you're not proficient, then you can chase your tail a bit. But what I did I'd have interview days. So I would schedule every second Wednesday as just an interview day. And because I've done because I've done a lot of it, I kind of know how to make it flow in that protective security interview sense. But if you hadn't had that training and experience, that could drag on. I did one interview with I've just got a major from an engineering organisation within the Army, and he was getting an upgrade from an NV1 to an NV2. So he'd already had a secret clearance, so therefore he already had access to the what's our secret? DSN. Sorry, how's that? Blank. Anyway, so it was actually a lateral transfer from the Philippines Army. And anyway, so I go and start the interview, and I'm just thinking I'm talking to a civil engineer that wanted a better life, and joined the Australian Army. So we start talking, and I go, all right, so tell me about your military career in the Philippines Army. He goes, oh, well, I joined the officer corps, blah, blah, blah. Then I did my intelligence training, and I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah. And then he goes, yeah. And then I said, oh, so what'd you do in the Philippines intelligence? Oh, human intelligence in southern Philippines, which is all in, terrorism area. I'm like, what? And then he goes, oh, yeah, my best friend, he's now the attaché in Canberra. And long story short, I've just kind of wound the interview down and rang Canberra and said, mate, you need to have a look at this bloke. Not saying he was doing anything nefarious, but he had access to the DSN and could quite easily pass Five Eyes documents onto his best mate, who's the attaché at an embassy in Canberra. Hello. So occasionally.
So have you ever nailed, got someone and been like flat out terrorist?
Not in that capacity. Not doing not a flat out terrorist doing vetting, but. I don't know the back end of that. Once I handed it over to DSA and agencies in Canberra, I don't know where it went from there. But to me, that was massive red flags. He shouldn't have had a secret clearance, let alone. Because what they've got to look at is, how open and honest was he in his initial transfer? Did he just say he was a Philippine civil engineer coming across to a construction company and engineer corps in the Army? Did he disclose his background? So, which is why I handballed it. It could have been a nightmare, and I just went, nah, there you go, DSA or AXPA, off you go.
And no other little close call.
So there was a few in the criminal space. So guys that had I'll say extensive criminal backgrounds. There was one poor bloke that, when he was in his early 20s, was a bit of a hothead, and had a few assault charges and drink driving, and but really had a wake up call and had turned his life around, and was working hard, raising his kids in South Australia, and I felt really bad because under the guidelines he hadn't reached some thresholds, but you could just tell he was such a genuine bloke. Didn't drink anymore, was married, raising kids, working hard. I went into bat for him. So there's a lot of that, a lot of pot smokers, because you ring friends up. And the first thing I always go is, during the interview, I go, right, so you've nominated Fred and Barney as your two people for interview. Yeah. Who don't you want me to talk to? What? Well, give me a name of someone that you don't want me to talk to and why. And if they're not open about that, or like, my ex-wife, why? Well, she's my ex-wife and hates me. Well, that's a genuine answer, and you can have a bit of a banter. But I used to throw that one out there because, you load up, hey, a vet is going to ring you, make me out to be a good bloke. And everyone does that. So I used to throw that out there, and some of the answers were pretty funny. You have to ask about their sexuality, because you're trying to look for leverage points that an adversary can use to then get information from you. So compromising photos, opinions, things like that. Then someone can go, well, if you don't get that information from me, I'm going to release this, or I'm going to tell your wife you're doing this, or,
So if I was a closet,
well, so I'll talk to you. So, all right, Max, tell me about your sexuality.
I'm straight, and I.
So, is there anything in your, what year did you lose your virginity?
Well, this is good. 20. When I was 17.
And how did that go?
Terribly. As
Have you had any sexual experiences that you're ashamed of?
Probably 90% of them.
You know what I mean? And then why you're ashamed of it? Oh, I didn't perform well yet. Or there were photos taken, or a video was taken. Right, where's that? Because that video can then be leveraged. And if we look at the Australians that have been convicted of stealing government documents, the young blokes all got bribed by prostitutes. So I think his name's John D. Whisperlair, I think he's one of the kid's name. But he used to go to a brothel in Canberra. He worked at one of the intelligence agencies, and he was lonely and wanted comfort, and started, getting in there a little bit drunk and talking out of school, and then she just got to a point where I think she even became his girlfriend, and then turned around and said, hey, you can get some stuff and we can sell it, make some money and retire. And he's like, oh, yep, no dramas. And they tried selling some information about the US to a third country, and that third country just contacted the US and said, hey, this is what's going on. And so the guy got caught and arrested, but it was all because he was being honey trapped. So, and gambling's another one. But yeah, so your sexual background and gambling are two big ones you've got to explore. I know when I did my top secret interviews, I had a really straight, no nonsense kind of guy. And he goes, so tell me about, how would you describe your sexuality? And I go, I'm trisexual. And he goes, and what does that mean? I said, I'll try anything once. And he didn't, he just started writing, and I started laughing. I go, mate, that's a joke. And he goes, this isn't the place to be making those kind of jokes. I was like, oh shit. So yeah, and having been through the process, when you're actually doing it, you kind of understand it a bit better. But gambling's another one. How often do you gamble? Just when I'm at the pub. Oh, yep. So you hit the one-arm bandits. Oh, yep. How often do you go to? Because if you're pumping your pay, especially young soldiers and that, pumping your pay through the pokies, and you need money. So you're looking for that. People think it's like, links to people.
And this is funny. They think it's quite benign, but it's effective. You're selling state secrets,
and
right?
leads you, and this understanding and learning this process was so beneficial later and to what I do now in the CVE, because it was the first exposure I got to doing something like that. It's a process. It's not an event. No one just wakes up one morning and goes, I'm going into work today and I'm going to download some classified maps and then go into the Russian embassy and sell them. It just doesn't happen. It's a process. So it might start with your fight with a girlfriend, or you've gambled your money away, or you've lost your paycheck repeatedly on the pokies, and they might repossess your car, and you know what I mean? And instead of reaching out to your boss or going to see a psych or talking to a mate, you hide it. And these are the traits you're looking at and looking for in someone when you're vetting them. And now in what I do, what I'm looking for someone who's susceptible to becoming a extremist or a violent extremist.
Right. So you went from
so I was vetting for a company, subcontracting to a company called Cogent, and then my ex-wife used to, and she's a corporate super soldier, you know, right? She's really, really high up at Telstra. And she'd come home all dressed up, looking at me in my board shorts. How's your day? Oh, yeah, I logged on. I did some work, went to the gym, had a swim. And she's like, that's not work. Right, you've got to get a job. And I'm like, what? I'm earning more than I earned in the army. No, you're sitting in your board shorts all day is not a job. Okay. So then by sheer fluke, I found out about the job at Thales, which we've discussed about the subs. So I went for that job and got it. So I was we got back from a family holiday from Fiji on the Friday, and I started on the Monday, 9th of January, 2017, maybe 2018, in there somewhere. Anyway, and then 2018. And then I was the security manager for the underwater business unit for Thales Australia, which is their submarine projects. It's massive, massive job. Vetting's required because you've got to get all these engineers qualify, get their security classification so they can access to the secret information about what's on a sub or how to build it, or having to accredit rooms to house secret and top secret servers and computers and stuff, access control points. So it was a pretty full-on job doing a security risk threat brief. So, and from the perspective of an adversary, especially China and Russia, China being the main one, stealing Australian industry defence secrets, and explaining to the staff how that works. So how they get human source, so how they get recruited. Again, it's a process. It's not just some bloke you see in Hollywood where a guy rocks up and says, hey, you know, I'm a Chinese spy, can you start getting me stuff? There's a really, really long process involved in having to be on top of that. There's a fair bit of politics inside a French company that is working on Australian classified material, that when the bosses want access to that and you've got to say no. Like I had to refuse entry for the Thales group, so the whole of Thales Global. The guy who's in charge of that, I had to refuse him access to a couple of rooms about a submarine project. I want to, understand that. Well, you can't, mate. I'm the boss. Well, it doesn't matter. This is an Australian compartmentalised program, and you're not Australian and you don't have a clearance, so you can't go in there. And they're all like,
How active are foreign agencies?
Every day, hundreds of times every day.
In recruiting, trying to recruit. And we're doing this as well.
Not to the length, nowhere near to the length that they are. You would have heard, and it's very relevant in the media at the moment, the Chinese Road and Belts program. That's all an intelligence collection program. Their idea is to leverage debt on a political organisation and then trade that debt for information. They've got something in, I think the QUT's got a branch of it, but basically they fund parts of universities, again, to get access to information. They put university students into programs to learn about, nuclear fission and things like that the Chinese Communist Party don't understand yet. They are prolific at stealing. And I'll give you an example from an Australian context. You can Google it. A company called Codan had invented a mine detector, and they were about to sign a $450 million contract in Africa through the UN to sell and train all these African countries on detecting landmines. The Chinese Communist Party hacked into their computers, stole the specifications and the design, rebuilt their own, and then undercut Codan to the UN, and they got the contract.
Yeah, mate. We see this a lot with, especially in DFSW when we used to do all the Chinese tanks are literal rip-offs of either Russian. Most of them are Russian, so they're types as opposed to Ts. But they are absolute rip-offs of every Western or other Eastern Bloc country.
Oh, equipment. Yeah. Even as far as like Komsky is a big one, but they were, and again, if you Google this, China tries to steal F-35 information. You know, the F-35 jets, they were actively trying to break in because, you know, the ASD and the cyber terrorist group in Canberra overlook the defence secret network. So there's a lot of firewalls and stuff in there. So it's very hard for the Chinese government to hack into that. But now a lot of the R&D in that is outsourced to companies and universities. They don't have that firewall protection. They don't have the level of encryption in that. So they just go, well, we don't have to target the ADF anymore. We just go target industry. And that's what they do. And, they actively turn up to, I don't know if you've ever been to one or seen one, but every year in certain locations, Vegas and Dubai being two, they have military conventions. So me and you can design a new gun and we get a stall over there and we try to sell it to all the world's armies. Well, the China don't buy it. They just write down, Mex and Shane Incorporated and then try to hack into our systems and steal it.
Bloody hell. Yeah, we had one of the guys from Head Up Charity on the podcast last week, and he's in America at the moment he's in China at the moment doing work. He's laying cables for CNN, covering off on the Winter Olympics. Phenomenal, some of the stories he's saying. We're going to get him on and have a yarn with him because he's saying it is like he is marched to and from his room. If you speak bad about the party, he goes, the Wi-Fi will cut out. And we're like, no, it won't. Sure enough, mate. We tried to, luckily we had a localized recording on this end of the podcast because the actual online cloud recording of his just shut off halfway through.
Did you see?
And we're like, no.
Yeah, there was an interview. A journalist is live talking to the camera and said something and they just pulled it straight off. Yeah. Me and my brother, Simon, we were the biggest distributors of sports supplements in Australia in the late 90s, early 2000s. We had a company called Supplement and Nutrition Distributors. And we did a fair bit of business in China. And they, even then, were all about reverse engineering. So you'd go over and go, we want to buy creatine and protein powder. We brought out, we were the first ones to bring pre-trainers into Australia, first ones to bring Tribulus into Australia, and they'd want to know that and then try to make it themselves and start their own companies. And the other thing, and it's massive, and this is why Australia and America and that said no to Huawei and their 5G. Any company that does business or has a Chinese company is part of them. Under Chinese law, the Chinese government has to be able to have access to their file sets. So, for example, and I can't believe, Elon Musk has just started a Tesla factory in China. But so that basically gives the Chinese Communist Party legal authority to get any information from Tesla they want.
So what's That sounds like they're going to come out. We're going to get out a Chinese version.
100%. And they're already doing it. Already doing it.
Mate, so this is going to be interesting. We're going to have to, when we get to, I want to bring this up and how these state actors are going to start maneuvering, especially with the current crisis. But so you go from Thales.
Yeah. So, okay. So we fall pregnant with our middle son, our youngest son, little Seb. And then when he's born in May, I take paternity leave and saved up all my leave. And then during that, I bumped into an old CO from my military company or military unit, and he was the director for the Office of Police in New South Wales. And we're having a yarn, and he said that New South Wales Juvenile Justice was starting a CVE team and they needed a senior intelligence analyst. So I got online and applied for the job and got it. So I was so this was in June 2019. So I was part of a 5-person team, a couple of psychologists, social worker, criminologist, and we started working essentially with juvenile terrorism-related offenders, which, was the start of where I am today in that professional sense.
And so we're talking about actual radicalized youth.
Convicted. So when I started, there were 5 convicted, 4 convicted, 4 before the courts of serious terrorism attacks. So 2 of them are the young guys that went into a rifle shop at Bankstown and bought a bayonet. And then they left, they went around the corner and law enforcement arrested them there for they were just about to conduct a frenzied attack on Bankstown Police Station and Court.
How old are these kids?
They were at the time 16. Another one was he was 17 and he wanted to purchase a gun to conduct an attack on Anzac Day. Another one was the younger cousin of a guy who had already been convicted of a terrorism attack, and he, one of the smartest people in that space I've ever worked with, but he was radicalising and recruiting adults online to get them to go to Syria. So it wasn't just kids that were susceptible. Some of these kids are, sociopaths. Some of the smartest, sophisticated terrorists I've ever worked with.
And so you're going in and doing these interviews. I mean, is it just? I mean, you're trying to draw information out.
Yeah. So it was very, very, very new, not just to juvenile justice, but to Australia and actually in the world. My boss, who started the team, had done a 1-month trip around America and Europe with my old CO who was the director of Office of Police. The head of New South Wales Police Counter-Terrorism at the time, Mick Willing, and the head of the extremist unit at New South Wales Education. They went to Area of the Hague, and there's 2 schools of thought in how to jail a terrorist. There's what they call the contamination model, which is like your Supermax, stick them all in there together. And then there's dispersal. So spread them out and have society chip away at that extremist. And that was the process that we had. So there was a massive training burden on us to train all of the juvenile justice staff in identification of radicalisation and extremism within youth justice jails, as well as then, we didn't think it was as big a problem as it became because no one had been watching it. But the federal government, Home Affairs, had just brought out new legislation that gave the Commonwealth the ability to do continued detentions. And New South Wales mirrored the legislation. So you had the high risk terrorism offenders legislation, and then you had the terrorism, high risk terrorism offenders, and then terrorism high risk offenders legislation. One was the Commonwealth, one was the state. And that basically gives the either the ability to go to the Supreme Court and apply for a terrorism-related offender that is coming up for either parole or release to continue to be detained because they still have a terrorist ideology. Now, a lot of this legislation was mirrored off existing legislation in the sexual predator space. So a rapist, if rapists still, they might get sentenced for 20 years, and at the end of that 20 years, they still deemed to pose a risk to the community, so they can be kept in detention, or they have what they call extended supervision orders. So their parole or their might be coming up, and they apply to those conditions are extended because they want to be monitored more heavily in the community, especially online. So that was brought out because in 2005 there was a group of domestic terrorists called Operation Pandenis. Half were in Sydney and half were in Melbourne. Now, because we don't have federal courts and federal penitentiaries, you get tried for a Commonwealth crime in the state that you're arrested. So the Pandenis guys, half of them got tried in New South Wales and half got tried in Victoria. And at that stage, Notoria judges were noted for giving lesser sentences than in New South Wales. And that's exactly what happened in this case. So all the guys in New South Wales got like 30, 35-year sentences, and the guys in Victoria got far less. So they had to bring this legislation in to ensure that any of the Victorian guys that still held these views could be kept in detention. When it dropped, it turned out that the actual first convicted domestic terrorist that this legislation applied to was one of our juveniles in New South Wales. So we were the quote-unquote guinea pigs for the whole process, from doing the interviews, writing the reports, going to the briefings with the Minister for Health, Minister for Home Affairs, and right through to going to the Supreme Court and giving evidence and then monitoring. So,
how many is this a big problem in Australia?
What do you mean? Big, yeah, in the jail term, it is a problem in all correctional facilities for a number of reasons, but it's a problem because there's no consensus on how to deal with it. There's a lot of people in the space that don't have an idea, but people listen to them. And Home Affairs are toothless tigers when it comes to almost going back to COVID. Because they don't own the jails, they can't force the state's correction organisations to follow the same procedure.
How does that and this is still something that you're intimately involved with?
I still do interviews, go to jails, do interviews, write reports. Yep.
I'm blown away. Who are radicalising these people?
Other convicted.
Is it?
Yeah, terrorists.
From inside prison.
It all Prislam, as I call it, and white supremacists. That all starts in jail. They've got a lot of time in their hands. They've got to join a group or a tribe. For some of them, it's actually a protective factor because it puts structure, especially converting to Islam. Praying 5 times a day, living the 5 pillars, doing your charities can have a positive influence, especially in a correctional environment, because it's putting someone on a positive path because it's adding structure to their life. where when they don't have structure and they get idle and lazy and bored, then they can do negative things. The problem is because there's no set process, agreed process on the training and how that gets implemented from a organizational template, it's not viewed very favorably by a lot of, like New South Wales corrections are dead against it. They'd rather, lock them all up in a supermax and let the hate flourish.
Are these, what's the sentences for if you get convicted of these young kids, 16 and stuff like that? They're in juvenile.
So they start,
So what, they get to 18, they get
No. So they start, the ones I initially worked with started in juvenile justice. They can, in New South Wales is the only state to have this, but when you get sentenced in a juvenile court, you can apply for a 119, which means that you can actually serve up until your 21st birthday in juvenile justice. So some of the kids that I work with had 10, 15-year terrorism sentences, and they did from 15, 16 in juvenile justice to their 21st birthday. Then literally they get an orange jumpsuit and driven to Goulburn. And that was some of the frustrating things. We had done some very, very good intervention work and really turned them around. Then they just going down into Goulburn, and I know one of them in particular has done a 180 and he's as hardcore as ever.
And then they'll just get released back out.
He'll wind up going through the hard toe and throw processes, and if he still holds the belief structure he's got currently, he'll get continued detention. So he'll stay in custody indefinitely as long as he holds those beliefs.
Can you take me through this continued detention stuff? So, I mean, let's say I go to prison for murdering someone or murdering, I don't know, right? And it gets to the end of it and they go, hey, Mex is still a bit of a fucking Fruit Loop.
No, so not for murder.
Is that something that can apply?
Not so much for murder. There's no legislation that I'm aware of that can enable the government to extend a murderer's time behind bars. But that's the idea of top and bottom sentences. So when you first go up for parole, and you're first of all, it's a paperboard. So has he done? One of the first things I look for is there remorse? Is he remorseful of his act? What work has he done with the psychologist inside? What programs has he done? Has he been have a job? Has he been fighting, acting out? And if that's all negative, then obviously you're not going to get parole. But then when it comes time at the end of your head sentence, if they still deem that you're a threat, there's not a lot they can do. But coming up to that point, they can extend your time in jail for offences inside. So you look at someone like Bassem Humsey, the guy started Brothers for Life and that. If he had been a model prisoner, he'd be out of jail by now. But because he still has fights in there and runs criminal enterprises from jail, he's never getting released. So even though he technically doesn't fall under one of the continued detention legislations, because he continues to commit crime in jail, he keeps getting sentences extended for those crimes. So, if me and you are in Long Bay Jail and I punch you on the head, I get charged with assault, and if it's bad enough, I can get 2 years sentence for that, and then that can get added onto my sentence.
So continued detention, is there they'll just keep going until your behaviour is deemed that you can be a contributing member of society?
Yeah, depending on the legislation, whether you're a sexual offender or a terrorism. But if you're a terrorism-related offender, and it's got to be the Minister for Home Affairs applies to the Supreme Court for the continued detention. And initially it's 3 years with a review every 12 months. And then after the second year, coming into the end of the third, is when they'll convene what they call a talk, so Terrorism Operational Review Committee for that individual. And about 6 months into it, the Minister for Home Affairs will have to make a decision whether he or she, on the advice given by whatever contributing parties, believes that person is still a terrorist, and then we'll apply to the Supreme Court for extension of that continuing detention order.
Right, so it's not like Shawshank Redemption where the warden's just continually banging on sentences.
No.
This is the minister.
Yep. And they've got to, and then it goes to Supreme Court. So say, I'm the terrorism related offender in we're talking about. I retain a legal counsel and I defend it. So a lot of the work that I'm doing now is in the defence space too. So we write an independent report for the court. So we'll get the information from the AFP or the JCTT, and we'll get the information from the defence team, and we'll do a violent extreme risk assessment on that individual from a neutral perspective, and look at intervention strategies and all environmental factors. Come up with why is this person still a threat, and then provide that to the Supreme Court for the judge to make his or her decision on that order.
Oh, there you go, mate.
Yeah, it's a pretty. I'll say it's a pretty robust legislation and process. The problem is it gets abused, and there's not a lot of solicitors that understand it, especially in the defence space, and that's a bit of trouble there. And I now do a lot of lectures for LegalWise. So solicitors have to maintain their training and skills like PTs do. You've got to accumulate points each year. And I do 2 different lectures or presentations on terrorism legislation, and each of those are worth 3 points for solicitors. So now solicitors that are going to work in the terrorism space have to have these points to do that.
So they're not like, when we talk about abusing them, we're not talking about little Johnny, he's at school and he's set off a sparkler bomb, and someone's got an axe to grind, like we're going to charge him under the terrorism
100%.
Act, and people
100%. Yeah.
Yep.
Or they get information that, these 4 guys have converted to Islam, or, they're starting to wear swastikas. And this is what my crusade is now. That's when they're right for intervention. They should be reached out to, and hey guys, what are you doing? Why are you wearing, swastikas, or why are you, why did you convert? Why are you watching ISIS videos? Whatever it is, and start the dialogue and start intervention. And that's what CVE is, counter-violent extremism. You're opposing the narrative, and you're working with the individual or the group to realign their views with the public narrative. What's happening now a lot is law enforcement will insert someone into that group or organisation in order to get them above the threshold in order to make an arrest.
So
pretty much 100%. Well, think about this one. At the end of last year, 60 Minutes did that story, with that journalist of the century, Nick McKenzie, on right-wing extremism in Victoria. And he had the head of ASIO, Mike Burgess, on. Now, he used the same rhetoric and language that Mike Burgess did. Where do you think that come from? How did he get that access? And then, because he's also works for The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, front page was all the photos of the guys that they filmed on 60 Minutes. And, one of the guys is an ex-commando. He was the head of security for Crown Casino. Mate loses his job. His whole life is wrecked. He hasn't been tried. He hasn't been put before a court. Hasn't been convicted of breaking any laws, but his whole life is thrown upside down because they wanted a result. They wanted to disrupt this organisation, and they did it with non-legal means.
I'm a little bit blown away. Is this the same sort of? This is the same. We're talking about non-legal means and trial by media that we're talking about with the RS trial. At the
same
moment.
Guy, same journalist, 100%. His life will never be the same again, Ben. God, I could go on forever. Having I served with him. We were talking about Choggum before. I worked with him and 2 Squadron on that Choggum. You know, they were the operational arm for the Tactical Assault Group West for Choggum 2011. So, you know, I deployed into Afghanistan with 2 Squadron and Ben, and know those guys, and we'll sit there some nights and listen to the media and cry and just think that is so far from actually what happened. And this poor bloke is being absolutely crucified for no other reason than jealousy.
How far is that court case finished now?
We'll get to the end, but you know, there's still witnesses and cross-examination and closing arguments, and I reckon maybe end of year before it's all done and dusted. But he'll never be the same. Yeah, I look at him, and I know what, with my personal struggles and family law courts and stuff myself, and you know, I have good days, and I look at him every morning walking in, you know, proud, and I'm just like, mate, that's just who he is. And yeah, anyway, like I said, I could talk for hours on that.
Is he going to be the modern day Ned Kelly? He'll be infamous or famous. How do you think he's going to come out of this?
So that's yeah. I just hope, you know, and we have as a public short memories, but you know, if you go back and you get on YouTube and you watch his interview on Channel 7 when he won his Victoria Cross, and, you know, he's talking about Matty Locke crying, and he's talking about the guys he works with, you know, his love for the guys he worked with. And like I said, and, you know, I've told you this story before. The first time I met him or worked with him over in Perth, mate, we got into a stand-up argument in a holding area about information, and, you know, and because they strive for excellence, and he's passionate, and he is one of the best soldiers I have ever worked with. And, you know, and he's met, I got him out when I worked with the Mountie Seagulls to talk to the young blokes, like, you know, and it's on YouTube. If you Google Ben Robert Smith, Manly Seagulls, it's him giving a talk to these young Manly blokes. And that's like Jake Travojevic and Clint Gutherson and that were in that room. And he's not talking about being a soldier or heroics. He's talking about being a better person. And that's something that all those kids, and I know because I know most of them still try to live by. You know, my oldest son was in that room, and you know, so he's always been divisive because he has a personality that is massive. You know, his personality and ego's in a room before he's. You know, there's no denying or hiding from that fact. And it is definitely with and against him, love-hate. You either love the guy or you hate the guy. And I think that's more about what's on trial now than all the other crap they're talking about. But again, if you go to YouTube and Google Tizak, and there's a Liveth the More documentary on the Battle of Tizak, and you hear what he does there and why he got his Victoria Cross, and mate, anyway, yes, I like the Ned Kelly analogies. You're probably right, to be honest. I just don't hope they have the same end.
No, I think, well, at this stage, from all accounts, following it on Twitter and social media, especially on all the meme pages, his lawyer is killing people on that stand.
I had that exact conversation 2 nights ago with a close friend, and I said, mate, who's actually a lieutenant colonel in the ADF, I said, you watch when his SC gets up and makes mincemeat of these of the witnesses. Because again, it just comes down to jealousy. You know, are you making this accusation because, you know, you're a shit soldier and you had an ND, or you didn't, you know, you're an infantry section commander? What would you do if one of your privates didn't oil his weapon and had a malfunction during a gunfight? There you go.
Attitude readjustment.
And so this bloke's having a massive crack at RS because that's exactly what happened. Something that's happened to every young soldier. Every young soldier fell foul on an exercise or going through IETs for not cleaning their weapon and having a malfunction. Mate, you don't expect someone in the most elite unit in the Australian Army, in one of the most elite units in the world, to have that.
No, there's a standard that you should be
100%.
living
So
up to.
don't
right?
cry when you don't meet that standard.
Yeah, I mean, we had Keegan Locke, Matthew Locke's son. He's been part of Swiss probably since its start. He's just had a kid now, and he's having a breather and really investing in that. I mean, he was talking about, that very incident where his dad got his MG and this dude's UD.
That's the guy, yeah.
He's at a...
That very guy's the guy in court whinging.
So,
you're like, mate, you had a UD because you failed in your basic... You don't have to be an SAS guy to do that. You learn that at Singleton at the School of Infantry. Clean your weapons. It's the first thing you do during morning routine. One boot on, one boot off, getting some brekkie, cleaning your weapon. It's a basic soldiering.
Yeah, I hope it comes out. It'll come out. It'll be good. But, mate, while I've got you, before I lose you on... Are you over what's going on in the Ukraine at the moment? I mean, I know your Middle East is your area of sort of expertise. But you've been pretty spot on with some of your assessments. I mean, we spoke about the Afghan withdrawal on the news a couple of times, and your assessment was pretty bang on there. Mate, would you be willing to put your hat in the ring and make an assessment?
Well, so I actually deployed to Ukraine with SOCOM when the MH plane got shot down. So I've actually been and seen and the separatists. So for a time during my SOCOM career, the Ukraine was my primary focus. It's interesting watching the geopolitical chess game because I get why Putin's doing it, and it's all about gas revenue, and I get him not wanting to lose more former Soviet countries to NATO. But what people also aren't reading the room, if you remember, Donald Trump was trying to get the US out of NATO. So he's effectively, NATO was becoming a toothless tiger to the point where the way the trajectory it was going on under President Trump, it would have almost been disbanded, but he's reinvigorated it by giving it a real-time enemy. So when he comes out and says, we're only doing this because of NATO, well, your actually best course of action was to do nothing because NATO was becoming nothing for that. If you don't have an enemy, what do you need an alliance for? Now they've got an enemy, they need the alliance. So it's actually strengthened NATO. They're more in sync and together now than they've been in probably 15 years. So that's backfired, which is one of his bluffs. It was all bullshit, to be honest. But and it's just him flexing. The other thing is, and I spoke to one of the think tanks I do some work with in the US last night about this. The other big thing he's misread from a geopolitical perspective, if you look at Scott Morrison is about to run for an election and in a bit of trouble at home. Sleepy Joe Biden's in all sorts of trouble with the Democrats in the primaries, in the midterms in America. Macron's about to run for re-election in France. And Boris Johnson, because of his parties and getting on the cans, he's in heaps of trouble. So what's better to deflect than pick a war? So all these...
Yeah, they say, what do they call it? War cabinets don't lose elections, mate.
That's what the Falkland Islands is all about. There was rioting in Argentina, so they invaded the Falklands and they were having celebrations. Then they lost and they got kicked out, but that's what it's about, So Macron flying to Russia to meet Putin has made him look very presidential with inside of France, and they stopped looking about how much he screwed the country because of COVID. Boris Johnson going and talking to Putin and doing all these deals has taken the shine off him getting on the cans during COVID. So they go, we can forgive him having that party because he's just saved us from World War III. So again, Putin's playing into these weak leaders' hands. If you get on news.com now, all the lead stories are about the Ukraine, and Putin came out and had a crack at Scott Morrison overnight. So all the negative Morrison stories have fallen off. And in a clickbait society, so what more do you want? So they're going to keep antagonising it. Putin's just going to keep poking the bear, little incursions. He's taken over those Russian-backed areas. But they were Russian areas anyway. And he's, we're just, what's he call them? Peacekeepers. We're just putting peacekeepers. If the US was serious or NATO was serious, you just put, deploy the 101st Airborne, the 10th Mountain Division, Royal Marine Commandos, some French units into the Ukraine, right? If you're going to invade, you're going to kill us, and then you've got a war on your hands. Move an aircraft carrier fleet into the Baltic. So you look at, the US go, we've deployed 9,000 troops, but you've put them behind the NATO curtain, not into Ukraine. So it's like saying, you go down the road and pick a fight, Max, but I'll stay here and you text me if you need me, rather than if I've really got your back, I'm going to walk down the street with you.
So you think this is all just a big bluff and piss and moan for the election season coming up?
100%. See, and I was thinking about this morning when I was reading the updates. I always put myself in everyone's shoes and look at my courses of action. If I was the president of the Ukraine right now, and I'm like, fuck, they're going to invade. They overmatch us militarily. NATO haven't given us any troops. They've given us some weapons. They've given us some armaments. Why don't I go all Japanese in December 1941 and attack first? Best force of film of defence is offence. Where are all their tanks lined up? Or where's, you look at what the Israelis do all the time. They get on the offensive. So where's all the Russian fighter jets based? Let's go and bomb that. Let's see what happens. He's not going to do that because he's worried if I do that, then they will invade. But mate, if you think they're going to invade anyway, why don't you at least try to give them a bloody nose off the bat?
Yeah, this is what sort of, and by no means, this is just the world according to Mex. I don't think you would telegraph an invasion of the second largest army in Europe and give them weeks and weeks of advance notice, and especially telegraph that to the Western world. You would just do it overnight, just like America did with Iraq, with Afghanistan. They don't read about it. It just happened, and then you get the news story
100%.
And that's what sort of gave it away.
He could have kept his armoured divisions well back, right, and done exactly like the US gave the world the blueprint in the first Gulf War. Air campaign for 20 days while you move your ground elements to the border. So you're exactly right. The Russians could have kept all their armoured divisions 100 kilometres back from the border and then started an air campaign to take out those artillery batteries and the Ukrainian air defence systems and ground areas while those tanks move forward after you've already got dominance. But like you said, by moving the tanks and that up to the border, it's just a massive chest poke. And Putin's in the same position. He doesn't want to look weak. He's got an end state, which is a negotiated peace where he comes out with exactly what he wants. Like, what kind of world leader has a $200 billion fortune? Hello, where does that come from? But the greatest X factor and everyone's worry is that someone's going to overreact. And a ground force commander, they fired shots. We thought they were about to invade, so we retaliated first, and that triggering the conflict. So it's the on-the-ground command and control that is at its critical point now.
So, I mean, hasn't Russia's economy just, it's halved?
Yeah.
The Russian... It's going to get interesting. I mean, you could be forcing him into something.
And that's why I think this is where he's miscalculated with the other leaders, because they're in such weak positions too. They can't be seen to be weak either. So Joe Biden can't be seen to, because think about all the mud they pushed at Trump being a Russian sympathizer and an agent of Russia. And Biden came out the other day and goes, "Thank God I'm the president. I'm the only president to stand up to Vladimir Putin." He can't back down. And I think Putin's misread that scenario. It's easy to pick on someone like Obama, the weakest foreign policy US president. And this whole crisis goes back to him not following through with his red line threat in Syria in 2013. because he didn't do that, and we spoke about it in my previous podcast, the West lost all respect for Obama, and no one feared him or America. And look at where the world is today. And it is a direct correlation from Obama's failings in the Middle East.
Ooh. So what do you think? He's going to be creeping excellence, biting off little bits?
But like I said, my biggest fear on both sides is mission creep, because the mission at the moment is attack and defend, and no one seems to be backing down. There's a very, very good, and I'll send you the link so you can maybe put it underneath, but there's a very, very good YouTube channel, and it's a daily intelligence wrap, and they provide the information as I would briefing a commander. Maps with locations of military units, communications, Army, Navy, or air, land, ground, diplomatic cables. It is excellent. It's one of the, even from a military intelligence point of view, it's one of the best update briefs I've ever seen. So that's where I'm getting a lot of my...
Absolutely, man.
That's where I'm getting a lot of my information from. And, you know, they're talking about, they go down to the point where unit commanders' names and backgrounds and stuff. So
that is in depth. Mate, thanks for coming on and giving us a sort of an insight into the life of the terrorist hunter and how you went sort of post-service. I cannot believe the life going forward. What's the next sort of 5 years looking for you?
So hopefully keep building on becoming a better father. I want to keep working in the veteran mental health space, counselling and stuff. And unfortunately, I've still got the Brereton stuff to get through. And support my...
Because you're sort of kind of intimately involved in that?
It's 20 out of the 39. As being the targeting analyst and doing the Japel packs and that, getting the guys out the door, a lot of it is why were they there? Were they after the right person? How did you know? That kind of stuff, rules of engagement. Things that we've spoken about in previous podcasts is, you know, when you put a civilian lawyer to pull apart that, that's kind of one of the roles I'm playing, though, a lot of questions around stuff. And then again, a lot of them are my targets. Did they get the right guy? How do you know that? How did you confirm that? But the mental cost that took, you know, I'm going through a family law court thing at the moment, and when the Prime Minister and the Chief of the Defence Force get up and call you a war criminal, that doesn't go well for you. And they don't retract it; they just double down on it. So,
no, this family law court is something that I'm sort of been fairly drawn to. Obviously, I don't have kids and haven't gone through it, but I've just been watching this process really put stresses into people's lives. I mean, brother-in-laws, friends, families, you know, this whole process is destroying people.
Yeah.
Absolutely destroying people.
Because I'm going through it, and under the law you can't comment on your case, but fathers have no say or rights. Everyone that I know that's going through it or gone through it get hammered. You know, it's a long game. Lawyers are terrible. They're so expensive, and their whole thing is to draw it out, rip you off, send you broke. It is the cause of more mental health issues in veterans than anything else.
Absolutely, we've got a guy lined up. He's a bit of a secret coming on that. I mean, he's created a whole Facebook community. He's one of the biggest ones in Australia, I think, pretty in the Southern Hemisphere, that talks to this very fact, single dads going through the family law courts.
That's why I did all of my psychology qualifications and counselling and that. And you know, I've done parental alienation is a massive one that's not very well acknowledged in Australia. But, you know, I've just done 2 diplomas out of Europe on parental alienation, and there's no recourse in Australia for having your access withdrawn, and the effects that has, and the effects it has on kids. Why can't I see daddy? Or because he went to the war and he's still sick in the head. Where's the recourse?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. We spoke to a lot of guys that I know that were having, okay, well, now you've got PTSD, your mental health condition. Now you can't see your kids and you can't have guns.
So I at least twice a week get contacted by guys that I served with and do counselling with them. And so I probably got over 30 guys that I served with. I'll say on my books, but not, that I help talk to. And it's because I've not only been through there, but I'm very public about being in a mental health facility, having hit my lowest point, and how I came out of it. And I think, to be honest, that's my future calling. And it's why I'm so drawn to you and Sutto and Swiss 8, because I think it's the next calling for veterans, because there's so many out there that are struggling, and it's a linked, it's almost an ecosystem. They feed off each other. You served your country, and I know from a personal thing, at the detriment to your personal relationships. Then you get out, we're talking about transition. You transition out, and how do you go back, or can you rebuild that bridge, or what? And, the Army don't give you tools for that. You join the Army, you go through 90 days recruit school, IET school, selections, or this extra training, deployments, pre-deployment training. Then you do a 2-day course to get out, but they don't retrain you to be a civilian. They don't look at you and go, right, okay, so you've been divorced and you see your kids every 2 weeks. How are you going to handle that? How's your anxiety? We've spoken about the warrior gene before. Is that a factor? And then my latest research is focused around some stuff coming out of the US, where they now say that a lot of veterans don't suffer from PTS. They suffer from LTS, lack of traumatic stress. So in their service life, they were so used to operating in the chaos and at high tempos that when they come out, they can't handle the silence. And I know certainly for me, my psychologist early on said, I could put you back into Baghdad tomorrow and you'd be fine. And, I think I spoke about the analogy last time. She said, oh, you're a lion trying to be a domestic cat. Because I didn't receive training on how to go back to being a domestic cat.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's going forward. That's where I'm going to put a lot of my focus. And that's why, like I said, I applaud what you and Sutto do, because it's the next battle we all fight.
Absolutely, mate. We'll have to do a deep dive. I've got those articles that I've gone through that you sent me on those particular things, the lack of traumatic stress. And, mate, we'll keep getting you back on, and we'll keep
anytime, brother.
With the news and that, mate. We'll get those links from you, and we'll put them in the show notes for everybody for that particular intelligence.
The Ukraine intelligence update website.
Sick, mate. Thanks for coming on, and we'll
anytime,
chat to you
brother.
later.
Cheers.